Here are 7 things you should consider before moving to Orlando or the greater Central Florida region. Welcome back to Unlocking Central Florida, from Orlando to Tampa and everywhere in between. Today we're breaking down 7 things that you should consider before moving to Orlando or the greater Central Florida region. The first thing you should consider before moving to Orlando is that it's more than just Disney and Universal. Orlando has a lot of different entertainment options, things to do, and a lot of different benefits to being in the area. And mainly it's that there are so many different types of restaurants, variety of food option and culture, and there's also a lot of different types of theme parks in the Central Florida region beyond Universal and beyond Disney. And that includes SeaWorld, Gatorland, Fun Spot, Icon Park, Legoland, and many other attractions and amusement parks in the Central Florida region. And that allows endless entertainment options for people who live in the Central Florida region. And not only that, there's also Disney Springs, City Park, a lot of different options that don't require an annual pass. And even with the annual passes, Florida residents get really great discounts on the annual passes for the theme parks in Central Florida, in particular with Disney, Universal, and SeaWorld. And these passes tend to cost about a third of what it would cost to have an annual pass from out of the state. And while these passes tend to be more limited as far as what days you can go, they are also much more affordable. And if you're living local within the region, that allows you to be able to go to the parks more often, even if you have a more limited annual pass. And beyond the theme parks and attractions, there's just a lot to do in Florida. You can go to the beach, and even beyond the theme parks and attractions, the beaches are just a day trip away. There's a lot of lakes, and there's a lot of different types of other entertainment options beyond basic theme parks and attractions that are offered. And there's just a lot to do and a lot to enjoy year round, with really nice weather year round. And that leads me to the second thing, which is the weather in Central Florida. The weather is really quite nice year round. It is warm to hot weather and it is humid, but generally year round you can be outside fairly comfortably. You do get used to that warmer weather, and with it being generally pretty warm year round, it's less to get used to. It's not like living up north where you have hot summers and cold winters and then have to get used to the hot and then the cold and then the hot and then the cold. It's more consistent year round, making it easier to get used to it. And that can be a really great plus for people who live not only in Central Florida, but in Florida in general, and for anyone who lives in a more subtropical climate. But with that nice weather, there's also a lot of rain and thunderstorms, especially in the summer. There tends to be daily rain showers and thunderstorms, and they can be very short, like 10 to 30 minutes long, and they can come through and be a real strong and then go on its way. They can be a little bit longer on some days and just rain throughout the day. There tends to be a lot of rain, but generally it's on a day-to-day basis, and it's not super long lasting for each individual storm on a regular. And then of course there are also hurricanes in hurricane season that goes from June through November. It tends to start off slower and ramp up into the fall, September, October, November months. However, in Central Florida, it's a little bit more inland, it's a little bit more sheltered, and the impact tends to be less than what you see on the coastline of Florida. But that is something to consider. There still are also tornadoes, flooding, and other things to consider. But in Central Florida, you are away from that coastline and that direct impact. And the third thing to consider about Central Florida is it's quite spread out, and that could be different for different people. You have Orlando City Center, and then you have near Disney, and you have near Universal. There are 3 different areas essentially. And then you also have the airport in another area a little bit down over more towards Lake Nona. And then you have Legoland and other theme parks spread out in other areas. So there's a lot of different amenities spread out throughout the entire region, and depending on what you want and what you're going to be using the most might dictate and change for different people. So that means you have a large variety of options that might be really good for you, and that allows you to get a wide variety of really good options, because there are very expensive real estate options near Disney, and there are also very affordable real estate options near Disney. And that's because the region is so spread out. If you go more towards Polk County, prices tend to go down. and you can still be in good close proximity to Disney. And there also can be affordable options in Kissimmee as well. And with there being a lot of condos being built as well, and a lot of condo hotels and different options, and a lot of development and building going on in the area, this allows for a lot of affordable rent options and a lot of affordable options to buy condos and houses all within the region that might be all within the greater Orlando region. And it allows for a lot of flexibility and options, which leads me to the fourth thing you should consider before moving to Central Florida, which is affordability and the cost of living. The cost of living can vary greatly. Of course, the entertainment, the restaurants tend to be more expensive, and that can have a higher cost. However, and additionally, home insurance and car insurance can be more expensive as well, and there can be more limiting options, which can lead to higher prices. However, there are very affordable options for housing and for rent in the region compared to areas with similar amenities and with similar jobs and options for growth and for careers. With Central Florida, there are a lot of career options. Within Central Florida, depending on how you work it, you can live pretty affordably in Central Florida, and I have been able to do so at a fairly low cost, especially in the case if you buy a place where your utilities are covered by your HOA and your HOA costs less than what your average utilities might be anyways. And in that case, you could buy something very affordable, have an HOA that covers your utilities, saves you costs, and then from there, you can buy your groceries at the store instead of eating out and keep your bills fairly affordable. And if you buy the right car, that's a lower cost to insure. Also, that can save you money as well. My car didn't cost that much personally to insure. It was about the same as what it was back in Colorado. It was only slightly more, and that was coming off of a bundle. Moving to Florida, it hardly went up, and that was with pretty good options as far as deductibles and everything else. Some things were better, some things were the same, and some things were worse. But for me, I did find affordable options, but that was being over the age of 26 and having different things that allowed it to be lower cost, and part of it being having a newer car that is a model that is lower cost. But overall, there are really cheap options, and there are very, very expensive options as well. You'll see very high variance in the city of Orlando. There are extremely expensive places to live in Orlando where people buy homes to visit all over Florida, not just around Disney, not just in certain places in Orlando, but all over Florida. There are communities like that. But in Central Florida, it's not just one type of housing or one type of price point. There is a large variance. And the fifth thing to consider is the traffic and tolls that there are in Central Florida. There's a lot of traffic, and there are a lot of toll roads as well to make up for that traffic and to help cut down on commute times for people who live in the city. And this is also a way that Florida makes revenue, and they use that to fund their government instead of having income taxes, which is another cost you save when you live in Central Florida. You don't have that income tax, but in return, if you pay for the tolls, you have that extra cost in tolls and also in your property taxes. However, you can get by without buying a toll pass. I managed pretty well without a toll pass. There are plenty of different ways to get around, and if you tend to work around some of the busier times, you can get around. Of course, in Central Florida, it can be busy any time of day, even at very random times. There can be a lot of cars coming through, especially in the winter months, especially in the months where there's a lot of snowbirds, a lot of tourists. It can be very busy, and that can lead to a lot more time sitting in traffic and make it more difficult if you have hard deadlines to get to, and that can make it more difficult to make it to places on time without the tolls. So there are trade-offs. You either have to be waiting more time in traffic, or you have to pay for a toll pass. But depending on where you're at, where you're going, what time of day it is, the commutes can vary a lot, and also what time of year it is and how many cars are on the road in that time of year. In the summer, it tends to be a lot better than in the winter. And a lot of other places also experience this, but sometimes in reverse. In Colorado, there tends to be a lot more traffic in the summer and less in the winter. because the tourist traffic is in reverse. But for me, as far as city traffic, it's not bad for city traffic. If you're coming from more of a suburb region, it will be worse than from a suburb, because I was used to being in a suburb, and for me, the wait times and the amount of time to get to place per mile went up by about 3 times almost, generally on average. And that leads to the sixth thing, which is you're probably going to need a car. There's not a lot of good transportation options. While Disney World has really good options within Disney World, and some of the different theme parks have really good transportation services, that's not enough to get by on your day-to-day, to go to the store and from where you're coming from. It just depends, but generally that's not enough. And as far as the city and city transportation, there are new developments as far as expanding the Sunrail and different types of transportation options. There are 2 international airports in the region, with Orlando and Tampa International Airport not that far away. But even with all of the transportation options there are in Central Florida, and they do allow for different ways to save money and to use those transportation, there's not really a good bus system or a really great transportation system anywhere in Orlando, because it is so spread out. And with that, that leads to a lot of people having to use cars. And that's partially why there is so much traffic, because there are so many people in cars, and it's a very car dependent city, and you will probably need a car regardless of if you live close to Disney or if you live close to Orlando, unless you're extremely strategic about it and are very creative. But generally you're going to need a car to get around. And the 7th thing to consider before moving to Orlando or the Central Florida region is that there are a lot of bugs and wildlife. There's a lot of alligators in the lakes, although I never saw an alligator outside of water. And even going to a place that has a lot of alligators, I barely saw one in the water. I didn't actually see its snout or anything come up out of the water, but they're not necessarily a thing you see super common if you're not going out and seeking them. Of course, you're not going to want to go in the water if it's a lake or a stagnant body of water especially, but generally on a day-to-day life, if you're just going to the theme parks or staying in Orlando, staying in the city and going around hiking or going to the beach, you're not going to generally see a lot of alligators on your day-to-day. It's not super common, at least in my experience. Most people that I've talked to just don't see them on a day-to-day or week-to-week, month-to-month. You might see them every here and now, but they're not as common as you might think. However, there are a lot of lizards. Lizards are very common, and cockroaches are fairly common as well. Especially if your house isn't really well sealed up, cockroaches might get in, and they're kind of like having ants in other states. You might have them coming in every here and now, depending on how sealed up your living space is. And that's something that I had to deal with my first year living in Orlando. But once everything got done up properly, sealed up properly, that problem was much easier to solve and was much less of an issue. Beyond that, of course, you got the love bugs, and there's a lot of different types of birds, which is one of my favorite things being in Central Florida, is that there is a large variety of birds that you don't see up north. And then of course there are a lot of different types of birds. You have sandhill cranes, you've got swans, you have all kinds of different really beautiful and cool different types of birds, some that are very large and some that are more average size that you just don't see as much or at all up north. And then of course you see a lot of the birds you see up north, you also see in Florida. There's just a much larger variety of birds that you see in Florida in general, and that is something that I've really enjoyed living in Central Florida and seeing in Central Florida, is that there are so many different types of birds. And some of these birds are really nice and friendly, like the sandhill cranes. And of course, you're going to want to stay away from the swans because they're more mean and aggressive, like the geese that you see up north. And of course, you see geese in Florida as well. And overall, if you like lizards and birds, you might really enjoy Central Florida. And you will notice more bugs year round because it doesn't freeze. But overall, I'd say the wildlife, bugs, and animals have been a net positive. And that's just something that you have to get used to and navigate But overall, I'd say for me, that's been a net positive experience living in the Central Florida region and living in the Orlando region. And one bonus thing of moving to Central Florida is that it's a transplant city. This means you're not going to be the odd person out moving to Central Florida, because so many people move to Central Florida from all over the country and all over the world. And this really makes it a melting pot. The United States is really a melting pot, but especially the Central Florida Orlando region is really a melting pot with so many different types of people from all over the world. And this allows for you more easily not to be that odd person out moving from somewhere else. And also, more than likely, many of the people moving to the region are moving there for similar reasons. Those are the top things to consider if you're thinking of moving to Orlando or the greater Central Florida region. If you're thinking of moving to Central Florida and buying a home, I'd love to help you through the process and to help you find a home that works for you. I have a buyer's guide linked in the description and comments below that breaks down the entire process of buying a home. That's all for today's video. Until next time.